Presented by Caltech.
First of all, as I said, welcome back. It's been a while. For some of you, I'm going to out Mel Stevens. I haven't seen him for 50 years, and it's so good to have you here, and others who haven't been back. I just thought I'd mention that the reunion team, before we get started here, Mike Baskus, George Brackett, Louis Frost, Steve Watson, Ted Jenkins, we got together, we talked, we helped organize this. So if this doesn't turn out too well, it's not totally my fault. And I want to give a shout out to Patsy Goujon, who's been doing this. And her team, she's been doing this for years and really does very well. And also, she has a tremendous support from alumni volunteers. I mean, one of our class members, Jim Crabtree, and I know a lot of others have been active in it, live here locally and help with the alumni events every year. So, yeah, thanks. Boy, this is more applause than Feynman ever got. So I just thought I'd frame us back, and then I'm going to give you some personal perspectives here, which will be a little bit like a random walk, but I apologize. But 50 years ago, what was going on here? I mean, we had both the Russians and the U.S. did a spacewalk then. This 50th anniversary of those. The Ford Mustang, I still have mine. 66 though, screwed it up. But also, while we were here at Caltech, remember the Cuban Missile Crisis and how serious some people got about that thing? I couldn't believe packing up stuff and food and everything else. And of course, we all remember exactly where we were, probably somewhere here on campus when we heard about John Kennedy's loss. And then, of course, his brother came and spoke here on a great scaffolding outside of Firestone, which was a big memory for me. And we graduated. Yay! I have some personal nostalgia here, though. In the last month, I've been to two anniversary celebrations, 50th anniversary celebration of Moore's Law. So while we were finishing up here, Gordon Moore, who's also a Caltech alum, he's PhD in chemistry here, and he's also past chairman of the board, and he and his wife and his foundation gave the largest single gift that any institution has gotten at any time, $600 million in 2001. So, and it was pretty much unrestricted. And as a trustee, I can tell you, we actually had a third party. They asked for a third party evaluation of this. We had it presented to us about 6 months ago, and they decided it was incredibly effective to take people like we have at Caltech and give them money for the kinds of stuff that is not grant ready at the time, and they go off and they make wonderful discoveries. And we can probably relate to that as well as anybody. Here. So, as I said, and at the Computer History Museum, the one I saw there, which was about 2 or 3 weeks ago, we had Carver Mead, some of you may know of him, and Bill Davidow, who's actually is a Caltech alum. He got his master's degree here, decided it was going to be too hard to get a PhD, and bailed to Stanford. But he was one of my colleagues at Intel, and really did the expert job on the marketing of the microprocessor. When we first got the thing, you had to come up with all kinds of support so people could figure out what to do with them. Now, it's gone crazy. And then at the Exploratorium, just Monday of this week, they had one for Gordon Moore. He was interviewed. He came from Hawaii, where he lives, and he was interviewed by Tom Friedman. And he's 86 now, doing pretty good. But there were, you'll see down here at the bottom, Parker, Wise, Puckett, and I all, plus others, there may be some others here that got a chance to meet Gordon Moore in a conference room in Spalding. Told us stories about what they were doing at Fairchild R&D and said, we're hiring. If you're looking for work, come and dial this number and schedule a meeting. And for a couple of us, that's what we did, and the rest is history, as we say. So I really, this is a personal thing, so sorry for taking us off track, but I think because of Gordon's Moore, because of the 50th anniversary, and because he's been such a supporter of Caltech, I thought I had to take a little bit of airtime. Okay, so let's get back what this is about. Do you know where you were sitting? No, ignore Steve Garrison here for the moment. I don't think he's here. But we actually have one of Ralph Leighton's buds here actually printed a large picture, and I think they're going to want signatures for those of you that are here, and we can figure out where everybody sat. So, and I have to thank, Donald Blumenthal for passing this on to me, I want to say 20 years ago for one of our other reunions. But any rate, I'm going to move on to our agenda here. As I said, the introduction, hopefully I'm within my time here. We're going to open with Ralph Leighton, and I'll tell you a little bit more about Ralph. And then we're going to have an open mic for about 20 minutes, which means that you're going to have time to tell your stories. We have hand mics, so be sure and get one. My preference would be, we're also video recording this. The video recorder's right there in the middle. If you would like to have your piece on video recording, come down here and stand either there or here and use the hand mic. And then you'll be there. And if it's too much trouble to get down the stairs, you can talk from your local place and we'll have your audio recorded. This is for academic purposes, but we are being video recorded, so stay dressed, and you may have, if you have any licensing issues, we'll sick an attorney on you. No, it should work out fine. So anyway, and then we're going to have Robbie Vogt, Kip Thorne. I will introduce those as the time comes up, and then another open mic based on their inspiration. And at the end, if we have time left, I think the preference would be for us to use all of that airtime ourselves with our own stories. But if we don't have more, Ralph actually has more material that he could show to us. So that's there, and this is how we'll end up. After this, as I said, there's the chairman of PMA is hosting us into a reception, which will be downstairs, and be able to mix and mingle, talk about Feynman some more. And then we're all invited to the colloquium, and I'm sorry, which will be back here in this room after the reception. And I'm sorry I don't remember what the topic is, but we'll find out what that is during the reception. So our first speaker is Ralph Leighton. Very simply, he's the son of Caltech physics professor Bob Leighton, who always stood back up there during the Feynman lectures, next to to that side of the slide projector, and I'm talking about real slides in the olden days. He actually made these early Feynman books come to print. If you've seen Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman, it lists Feynman as the author. And yes, they're Feynman stories, but the guy who transcribed them is Ralph. So, and he's done that, that's the first one, he's done several others. He's also been organizing all of the audio records. He has some questions and stuff, he'll tell you about that. And he promotes Richard Feynman. He's really done a good job. He was a friend of Feynman's for, I want to say, at least 10 years, as he grew up in the Caltech bubble, as he calls it. But he and Richard did a lot of drumming together, and then even some trips and other things. So a lot of close stories. So he knows them very personally, and he will tell us about that. So I would like to turn the podium over to Ralph. There he is. And escape here?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Ted.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I'm going to cue up something here, but before I do, I would first like to acknowledge Michelle Feynman, who is here representing the Feynman family. And if you want to say a word to somebody from the Feynmans, here she is. Just know what she looks like. So, I've been working with the audio from Feynman lectures on physics. And most of the time, for me, my work is something like this. I'll have this in front of me, and then I'll hear something like this. I hope the sound works.
February 20th, 1962, Lecture 30. February 20th, 1962, Lecture 30. February 20th, 1962, Lecture 30. This is the historic day in which John Glenn of the United States went into orbit around the Earth.
So, I guess you all knew where you were at that moment. I was in print shop up at Elliott Junior High School in Mr. Domenico's class. And in print shop class, we all just listened to the radio, and we were listening to whether John Glenn was going to make it down. But Richard Feynman actually tried to deliver a lecture that day, and it's kind of amazing because in this audio he's saying, "Would you guys turn that radio down back there?" So he was human after all, trying to give a lecture despite John Glenn maybe not making it back to Earth. They didn't know if the retro rockets were going to fire. So there's all kinds of interesting material in this audio, which is not in the books actually, and it would be nice to find a way to get that onto some kind of web server that you guys could all listen to, because I would love to get some assistance as to, well, who was that talking and what's going on? And that leads me to acknowledge someone else here, who he's up in the back. His name is Michael Gottlieb, and he curates FeynmanLectures.info. You should take a look at what he looks like, so you can go see him at the reception. There he is. So he would actually be capable of making something work where we can talk about what's on the audio that didn't make it in the books. We could share this photo online and things about it, etc. All that kind of stuff I think could happen through Michael. So I just happened to run into the audio that photo corresponds to. So I thought it would be fun to show you that photo at the moment it was taken and have you hear that. So that's what's going to happen near the end. But right now, I'm going to play a little bit because I have a few questions for you. So I'm going to stop this video every once in a while. I'm going to ask you some questions about it, okay?
September 26, Lecture 1, Atoms in Motion. September 26, Lecture 1, Atoms in Motion.
Okay, anybody know who that is? Who the announcer guy is? Or the guy who's, because that's his picture. And I know his voice a lot. I hear him every time introducing this. So that's something to put back in the back of your mind. I would love to know more about who that is. I know who Tom Harvey was. I knew his son Howard did the biggest splash dives off the high dive over there at Caltech Pool. That was Howard. Anyway, Tom and his British accent and all that. But this guy, I don't know. So anything you can tell me about the recording guy?
I think wasn't it Dr. Fauci?
I know Dr. Fauci, but that wasn't him. All right, well, here's another one now. At the very beginning, they made a mistake in the recording in the sense that when the guy is testing, he goes, lecture 1, he's speaking in a regular speaking voice. But when Feynman gave a lecture, he spoke to the last row. And so the first lecture is blown out with all kinds of overmodulation. So that's another question. If some of you are some kind of audio engineer experts of how to reconstruct audio that has been very severely compromised, I'd love to speak with you because that's one of my projects is to resurrect Lecture 1. But by Lecture 4, they figured, oh, let's test this by having somebody speak at the top of their lungs. So they got a student in there. So maybe you know who this is, and maybe this person is here. So who is this?
October 6th, 1961, Lecture 4.
All right, did you hear to him? All right, we'll find a way for you to watch this again. But one time a student got in there and did it. Now, here's my next question for you. In this first lecture, the microphone was set way too loud. So that made it hard to deal with the audio that Feynman made. But it also picked up some of the students. Especially the ones in the first or the second row. And there's one particular student in a lot of the lectures who's just got this distinctive laugh, and I'd love to know who that is. So I'm going to raise my hand when the laugh comes and see. I don't know if you can recognize yourself, but you might recognize, your friend from those times. So here we go. This is the very first lecture, the very first moments of the Feynman lectures on physics recorded at the wrong level.
For 2 years, I'm going to lecture you on physics. I'm going to lecture from the point of view that you are all going to be physicists. It's not the case, of course, but that's what every professor in every subject does. In the first 3 lectures, nothing is necessary to keep track of. No notes need be taken because what we're trying to develop is a feel for the subject. Of course, you can take down anything that you find interesting that you'd like to remember, but that's about it.
That's a joker right there. And you hear his laugh one more time a little bit later in the lecture.
Heads blow on soup if you want to cool it off.
There he is. Okay, so now we're going to come to the photo, the famous photo. It's rather remarkable that I think the only photo ever taken of you came about because a French magazine came in and did an article about Caltech. And the only way that I was able to stumble onto this recording, since I didn't do a systematic job, was that the publisher who's done all the audio and brought them out on CD has left out 3 of them. There are 3 lectures that never got put out on audio. So I felt I should concentrate on fixing up the audio for listening for those 3 that were never published. And lo and behold, one of the 3 never published lectures happened to be the one that this picture was taken. It's in the book. It's in 2nd year. Forget what it's on. But S29, so you can look at chapter 29, 2nd year. So anyway, so here we go. Here's the moment right after the lecture that the picture was taken.
Yeah, I'd like to, if you could stand here, I'd like to photograph past you and see the faces of the group.
Well, they're all going to leave, so... You want to get into the French magazine Realite? All right, yeah. Where do you want me? Facing them?
Yeah, facing them.
Okay, we're getting our names in the paper. Okay?
That's fine. Now,
All right. Thank you.
how'd you do?
Yeah, you can get, come on. Ask me some questions. You get your picture again. An E-field is, everywhere in space there's an E-field. Where's the guy with the cameras? You getting the pictures? Yeah, he's getting the pictures.
I feel like a publicity.
You are a publicity hound. Every once in a while we get caught by somebody. This time we got caught by the French magazine. Has anybody got a serious question?
Anybody know who the publicity hound was there? Was that one of the students, or is that somebody else they grabbed? That's nobody you recognize?
You mean the man in the picture with Feynman?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that's George Chapline.
Oh, okay. Hey, we got an answer.
He was a graduate student, and then for many years he worked up at UC
All right. Great. All right. Thank you, Dr. Frauci. And cool. All right. Well, we are planning to put the video that you just saw plus the actual article from the French magazine somewhere online, if we can get it past the intellectual property man here, Adam Cochran, because it's from the 60s, we might be able to get away with that, so that you'll be able to read what the French reporter thought about how you guys were dressed, for example. Because she definitely had some comments about how atrocious, but nevertheless, yes. So I'll show you one more thing, and that is that people have asked, oh, geez, didn't they make videos of those lectures? No, they didn't make videos. There are videos of the messenger lectures, which were given roughly the same time, so you can see Feynman about the same age, cracking some of the same jokes, doing some of the same lines, etc. And so you can see him in motion, but that was not the Feynman lectures on physics. There are some still photographs, but as you saw, they're kind of grainy and whatever. And then it suddenly hit me that maybe we can use the audio from the lecture and then augment it with some animation to get across the points that Feynman's making and in fact reach an audience today. Some of the younger, kids in middle school even can get some of these early concepts. So we're doing some experiments now, and that is animating the Feynman lectures on physics. As crazy as that sounds, let me show you an example of what that could look like. That's Feynman drumming with chalk sounds.
I have the privilege of calling your attention today to what is probably one of the most far-reaching generalizations of the human mind. And while we're admiring the human mind, we should take some time off to stand in awe of nature, which can follow with such completeness and generality such an elegantly simple principle as the law of gravitation. And what is this law of gravitation? It is that every object in the universe attracts every other with a force proportional to the mass of each and varying inversely as the square of the distance between them. If you like mathematics, you can write that same thing as an equation, proportional to the mass of each and inversely as the square of the distance between them times some constant. Now, if I add to this the fact that an object responds to a force by accelerating.
We need more money, we'll finish it. Here's another little snippet for you.
Galileo was studying the motion of matter. See, the problem is, even if you know this, what makes them go around? And in those days, one of the possible theories that were proposed was that what made the planets go around was that they were behind them here located invisible angels which are beating their wings and driving the thing forward. As you'll see that this theory is now modified. It turns out that in order to keep them going around, you need the invisible angels to be flying in this direction and to have no wings. Otherwise, it's a somewhat similar theory.
Might as well be.
Now, Galileo discovered a very remarkable fact about motion, which was essential in order to understand the reason for these laws. And that is the principle of inertia, which is this, that if you have something moving and just going along and nothing touching it, just not disturbed in any way whatever, Galileo realized by some experiments and generalizations and idealizations that he proposed that they would go on forever, coasting at a uniform speed in a straight line. In other words, if nothing disturbs an object, it'll keep on coasting at a uniform velocity in a straight line. Why does it keep on coasting? Maybe it's the angels, but we don't know. But at any rate, that's the way it is. Then Newton modified this idea and said even more.
that if you want to change the motion, you do it by a force. If you want to speed it up, or it gets speeded up when a force is applied in a direction of motion. It gets its speed changed into a new direction if a force is applied sideways, and it's deviated sideways. So Newton added the idea that you need...
And I'd like to acknowledge the artist who created those, Jen Onuki. He's here. So we'll be happy to talk with you all at the reception.
September 26th.
Whoop. If you have any more ideas, or the name of this guy is coming up for you. Okay, thanks a lot. On to the next person.
Thank you so much, Ralph. Now it is some of our classmates' turn, and I think it'd be great if you could come down, and we have our open mics are where? Right here, okay. One over there. So who wants to speak first? Oh my God, okay, well, okay. George even has slides, so we're in trouble. Oh, I thought you did. I'm sorry.
Can you hear? Is that okay? Somewhere there's got to be a switch. No, it should be on. Hello, are you hearing me?
He's not as loud as.
Yes.
It is on.
Okay.
There we go.
All right.
Okay,
Is
there
that
you
better?
go. There you go.
Well, I bring greetings from two people who are unable to be here. The first is Jerry Nelson, our classmate in 1965, who has gone on to a distinguished career, as most of you know, as a physicist and an astronomer. My wife and I had the good fortune to visit with him in Santa Cruz on our way here. Jerry, unfortunately, is unable to join us, having suffered a massive stroke several years back, which completely paralyzed his right side. And so, as you know, he's well known for the design of the Keck telescope, the segmented telescope on Mauna Kea, the 10-meter telescope, and he's now working on the design of a 30-meter telescope. I asked him what he would like me to say on his behalf. He finds it a little difficult to speak, so this is very short. I learned from Feynman and his courses a guideline that has helped me many times in my career. Keep it simple. I believe we saw just that such a thing just a minute ago. So I have one other, if you'll allow me. This is from Bob Sweet, who is at the Brookhaven National Lab on the other side of the country. Here is his, this is slightly longer. A continuing Feynman experience. When my second litter of children and their age mates were old enough to listen to real stories about 1995, I would visit their classroom weekly to read a story. This persisted past daycare into grade school, and through 5th grade, we read all of Tom Sawyer that year. Eventually, I went back to reading monthly to a class of 3rd graders, and I still do it. About 10 years ago, the local school superintendent, knowing my interest in helping in the schools, told me that she was doing book talks with high school students and felt she'd like to stimulate their interest in science by reading biographies of scientists. Did I have any books to suggest? You can see where this is going. I offered Surely You're Joking and What Do You Care as examples, plus the book by Gleich, QED, and 6 Easy Pieces. She decided that Surely You're Joking, with its trips to strip bars, etc., although clearly the most interesting, was not appropriate for the superintendent of schools to offer to her students. So we settled on What Do You Care, with the final section chronicling RPF solving the Challenger disaster mystery. The AP physics teacher's Mr. T, already a Feynman fan, bought into this immediately. Our protocol was to meet the class before a long holiday to distribute books and pique interest. We showed some YouTube snips Mr. T had collected of RPF waxing eloquent over something or other. I showed the iconic picture of us in the lecture hall, which by now we're beginning to be sick of, challenging them to find young Bobby. And then I told of some idiosyncratic but familiar to you aspects of Feynman's teaching style. A few weeks later, after the vacation, the class met for a book talk. We started out in the classic book talk mode. Everybody reads the book, we meet, then we all talk about it. Again, you can see where this is going. Every time, the actual book talk was a conversation among the physics teacher, the 2 or 3 girls who had read the book, and me. This wouldn't do. After a few years, I invented what I learned is known as jigsawing a book. I divided it into 20 10-page sections, randomly assigned each section to one student, and charged each with telling the story of that section. It worked splendidly. Everybody read his or her section, the story flowed, and everyone heard the whole story. And at the end, all the students had a pretty good appreciation for the man, how he interacted with people, and how he solved problems. It was very fun. Get into the local schools, however you do it, it is a splendid thing to do. I recommend it to you all.
Very good. Thank you, George. Thank you very much. It sounds like a techer to me. Let's, who's next? Come on down, Doug. Or, we can pass it over, sure. Did you pass this up to Doug?
One of the more seminal moments is really someone else was the main participant. And I'm not sure my memory serves me correct, but it was during Feynman's lectures on vision. And Feynman made a categorically absolute statement that although we could cross our eyes, you can't move your eyes apart. And one of us, I think it was Mike Vasquez, I'm not sure, I don't want to pin it on him, went down after the lecture. And Mike, if you're here, do you want to?
There he is.
Was it you? I don't think so. Okay. Okay, but it was one of us. And the person can grab me afterwards, say it was me. Went down to Feynman after we were filing out, looked Feynman in the eye and say, look at this. And he moved his eyes apart. And Feynman, one of the few times I'm sure in this class, was totally astounded. And then our fellow classmate explained to him that his eyes naturally were apart, and he had to force them together. But he was one of the few of us who I think really did astound Feynman with something that Feynman was absolutely sure of.
Would you like to hear that moment? I have that moment on audio.
Okay.
Wow. Also, well, I'll play it for you first, and then I'll tell you later. Oh, my dad's in there a lot.
Okay, if there's another one I'd like to cue somebody up and have people come down here perfectly fine.
Unless you have something the matter with the nerves or the muscles. Just a shade. You can? Yeah?
But it's a matter of relaxation. You can't pull them that way. I haven't been able to pull them.
You sure you can make them out? How do you know you can get them out?
By looking at something, at a distant object, and finding that its images actually look farther apart than if you cross your eyes. Like this. You can just relax.
Oh yeah, he does move them out. Let's see you do that. Do that again. But maybe they're not. Wow! You're a yogi. Not far, but you move them out. I don't know whether you move them beyond the parallel. Do that again.
You missed the really good line. Wow, he's a yogi. Let's do it again this time. Don't mind.
But maybe they're not. Wow! You're a yogi. Not far, but you move them out. I don't know whether you move them beyond the parallel or not.
And then they go on this whole thing about look up there, and how many images you see these guys. Yeah.
I shouldn't out him, but I did talk to one of our class members who does have eye tracking problems, and it could have been him. So I don't see him here in the audience, and I don't think it's fair to mention it without talking with him. But anyway, I think I might know who that is. I'll ask him if it's okay to. Well, Lewis, was it you?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, all right. Okay. Steve Watson.
Yeah,
the 10-minute calculus lecture. I had come here to be a world-class mathematician was my goal, and wound up graduating in chemistry and becoming a family practice doctor. But I had worked really hard in high school and tested out of calculus, and so I was sitting in the class, enjoying being able to understand all the math problems. And by the way, I was an Athenaeum waiter, and I don't remember spilling soup on Dr. Feynman, but I spilled soup on several professors, Caltech Twitch. But I remember him complaining that he ate lunch with math professors, and he did, and he respected them, but they were not teaching how to do physics problems. And so he said, I'm going to teach you how to do calculus today. I just have waited long enough. I think this was about 3 or 4 months at least into the year. And so I said, okay, cool, an hour lecture from Feynman. But then he says, in the last 10 minutes. And then he goes and gives a 50-minute lecture on physics. And I'm saying, no, this is not possible. And then he does it in 10 minutes. He explains differential and integral calculus, and it works. It's like, why did I waste a year?
No, you had to learn the inductive reasoning. That's the... Okay, thanks, Steve. Who's next? Oh, we have Mike Baskus over here on the other side. I think I know what this story's going to be.
Oh, I don't know. You know that. Well, following up on that, I remember many times, and I think you'll all resonate with this, sitting up in the front row, listening to the lecture, and then walking back to Ricketts down the Olive Walk and saying, oh, this is really easy. I understand it. It was such a great explanation. And then I walked into my room, and they gave us these questions to solve. So I start reading the question, and I have absolutely no way to solve this problem. Absolutely no. I have no idea. What does this have to do with what he was talking about? So I sit there, stare at the wall, and then I start thinking. And that's the operative word, thinking. And that's what Feynman taught me to do. I thought about the problem, and all of a sudden I said, oh, I understand. And then the problem was easy. And I've told the story to many people, and many Caltech people. They resonate. I think you've probably all gone through this.
Okay, who's next? Thanks, Mike. You want to come down?
Yeah, I will.
Okay, good. Then we'll get you on video.
Oh,
Here you go. Thank you.
Hi, just a couple of thoughts. I've been thinking a lot about what was Feynman's special impact upon me, and it was a couple of things. Pardon me if I cry, but I get emotional about this stuff. One is his arrogance and humility. He was arrogant enough to say he can think about things to their core and perhaps solve them. And that's a real arrogance that you don't find in most people. They shut themselves off before they think. And then the humility that he would listen to us as freshmen and sophomores and consider that perhaps we had something to say, that what we said or asked would influence or change his thinking. And that balance of arrogance or heedlessness or whatever you want to call it, and humility, combined with an exuberance to think and solve and play with these ideas, it was really, really inspirational, and it's colored my life ever since. And the second is his, what I call, outside-in strategic presentation. For a while I taught at San Diego State University, and I started by saying, what should I tell them, the students? And I realized that it doesn't matter what I tell them. I have to dig a hole that they want to fill. So I have to make them curious and anxious to solve problems or understand things. Then I have to give them a vehicle for understanding. And most of the time that's pretty straightforward. You paint a picture or something or other, but they can identify with. But once in a while you have to be pretty strategic. and Feynman was. You can give them a solution, lead them along the path, and then say, but that doesn't make sense, does it? He did that especially for us with hydromechanics, where I remember that corner of that board, he put up a differential equation, and he got, I don't know, halfway or 2/3 of the way through the lecture saying, so this is how water flows, right? Here's a cube, and we put the pressures on, it's going to go here, here are the forces. But guess what? It doesn't really flow that way. Everything we've done up to now would work if water were dry. But if you look at that differential equation, it doesn't account for the fact that water isn't dry. Don't give up, he said, because he was optimistic and enthusiastic. So now you know enough to understand how sugar flows, coal dust, salt, silt, all sorts of stuff. But to understand how real water flows, well, there are guys on the other side of campus, he said, that have devoted their lives to trying to figure out that differential equation, and they get closer and closer. But it was that strategy of saying, yes, you can tackle this, and then here's how well you can do with your tools, and here's some solutions along the way. It's colored my life since forever.
Thank you. Very good. Thank you, Benjamin. Our next speaker is Jim Crabtree. I know Jim.
I know Ted.
Hi, Jim.
Hi, Ted. When I was in high school, they called me UNIVAC. But when I came to Caltech, I was really a high impedance inductor with low capacitance. And Ted pointed out that that was a, what was that, a low Q resonator.
Low Q resonator.
And I went on internet and looked it up, and I realized that, yeah, I wasn't really very sharp, and I was too broad-minded. Anyway.
Wait, you're not going to talk about your beer activity?
Oh, yeah, making beer in my room. Almost got thrown out by the UCCs. Head of the surfing club and sailing club, things like that, all these extracurricular activities. But I really loved Richard Feynman, like many of us did. I had a heck of a time understanding him, being an inductor, as I was. And like Mike pointed out, you know, generally the oscillations stay around for a while, but with a low Q modulator, resonator, the oscillations die out very rapidly. And when I would get home with the homework sheet, I would just look at it with a blank stare because I didn't know what to do with it. And I never did have that aha moment. So anyway, but I actually have to report to you that I came in here one day at half hour before the lecture because I wanted to see what Dick Feynman was doing in here. And I was just amazed. Now, Ralph's going to have a hard time duplicating this, but he came in here and he pulled down all of these boards, all 9 of them, and wrote in his very precise small hand the lecture for the day, but it was only like 20 minutes of the lecture for the day. And then he hid all the stuff back up under the boards, and the class would come in, and he would start with this infamous board on the left, and he would start by pulling it down one by one, and then he would erase with his left hand as he went along. You remember him doing that? And those of us who were trying to get a nugget of truth out of it were out of luck. And then he'd go through all these boards and start over again. So, you know, I met him one time at a class reunion, and he said to me, you know, we were talking, and he said, you know, he said, you're at the height of your powers. You're the same age as I was when I was doing my physics lectures. And I thought, wow. And I had always watched Feynman very carefully at what he said, because what he said was so important. But what he didn't say really got to me, because I realized how much he struggled with certain questions that he could not answer. And we all know what those questions are if we read those books. And I have those books on the internet on my PC at work every day. So I'm constantly refreshing on it. There were 2 areas that he avoided assiduously. One was the Hamiltonian of the gyroscope, and the other was the Einstein question. Okay, this is the centennial of general relativity, Albert Einstein. And Einstein was asked by particle physicists what they thought of their work, what he thought of their work with particles. And Einstein answered, I just want to know what an electron is. Okay, a simple question. Yeah, what is an electron? And so Feynman did not talk about Schrödinger's Zitterbewegung. He did not talk about the Parson magneton. He didn't talk about any alternative models. He just jumped right into quantum mechanics. And that's fine, and quantum mechanics is powerful and a useful tool. But at that time when I met him and Gwyneth, I developed this strong obsession with finding out what the electron really is. And I've spent from 1965 on working on that question and coming up with my own answers. And for that, and Feynman is with me in so many ways. I feel his presence in my life. I feel connected to Feynman. Every now and then I start writing like Feynman. You know, it's like, I admit it's an obsession, but it's an Aspie thing. You know, we Aspergers, that's what we do, we obsess. So when I'm not working at work, I'm working on physics, much to the irritation of my wife, who is sitting here, or doing honey-do lists, if I can remember to do them. Anyway, thank you, Dick, we love you, we had a wonderful time, and the beat goes on.
Good, very good, Jim. Who's next? I see somebody up there. Patsy, do you want to come down, or? Thank you for allowing us the video recording.
Okay. I have two memories that I want to share with you about Dick Feynman. I started graduate school the year he arrived here, in 1950. One memory was physics department picnics. Many of you have gone to them. Can you imagine, those of you who weren't there, what Feynman did at physics department picnics? He entertained the children. The mothers loved it. And he was great at it, with complete nonsense. I mean, nothing that you or I would think of doing. He would just make totally irrational sounds and motions and everything else, and the children absolutely loved it. The other part of the story, even though I'm an experimental physicist, Feynman was on my orals committee.
And you defended okay.
Well, I'll tell you what he did. He started, when it's his turn to interrogate me, he said, I notice you've got some theoretical stuff in your thesis. I jumped right in. I said, well, it's only translation of existing theoretical material into a form that's useful for me as an experimentalist. I said, you know, I'm going to disarm this right away. So then he says, okay. He says, I remember the question. So if you put a black body out in space at the distance from the sun that the Earth is, what temperature will it achieve? My first reaction is, oh my God, I've forgotten the Stefan Boltzmann constant, which is the constant to calculate the amount of radiation energy from a given temperature object. And in typical Feynman fashion, he says, well, what if the sun surrounded you? And suddenly, it lit up. Because if the sun surrounded you, the temperature would be the same as the sun. But now the sun subtends only a little solid angle, and all you have to do is estimate the solid angle, and you get the answer. typical Feynman. I mean, he'd give you a hint. If you caught on, okay. If not, he might give you another hint. And then you get graded by the number of hints.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you so much, Victor. Who's next? Louis. Do you want me to pass this up, or do you want to come on down? Okay. Okay. Thank you, Patsy. I want to tell you, at the beginning we had some very technical proposals that might have appeared today, and I said, well, we're going to have a mixed audience, so let's be a little bit careful and explain it all. Jim did a good job on his. Louis had some other materials too, but go ahead, Louis.
Okay, well, mine is a little more serious. Most of my classmates, this is a question for the audience, all my classmates here. So most of my classmates ended up as professors with PhDs or maybe in government laboratories, but I ended up in industry and in research laboratories. But the experience I found was that a lot of people didn't have the education that I did and didn't have the technical education. And there were different groups. There were people, there were salesmen, not scientists or engineers, but there were salesmen who knew how to sell a project, like, say, time travel or something like that. So they would sell things that were absurd on a technical level, but they were successful doing it. And I always wondered whether they just didn't have the education or whether they were being dishonest. I mean, you could say, if you didn't know, you could say, well, I'm pitching something and I really don't know, but okay, maybe somebody will buy it. So the question I have is, and I've always wondered about this, did I pick up honesty from Feynman? Because I picked up technical stuff, and I think I picked up being honest technically, and not selling things that were absurd. And I'm just wondering, was that true? Did I pick that up from Feynman? Do any people have comments on learning honesty, technical honesty, not selling things that are that you can't justify? It's a serious question, but since I'm 50 years later, and other people have had 50 years of experience, and some of them maybe in industry, maybe you can comment on that. So I don't have an answer.
Answer? Pass Mike right over there behind you. Okay.
I don't have an answer. Where do you think Feynman got it? I don't know.
He claimed from his father. He wrote about that.
That's true.
Or he wrote about it.
My inclination is most people in this room at that time already had it, and they got encouraged by Feynman. I tell another story that relates to that.
If we had an honor code, and honesty would be part of the honor code.
So honesty is part of the honor code, according.
So there's a related story to this. I was at a conference on solar energy, and I've been doing that, and there was a VC in the front of the room who was well known, venture capitalist, had a lot of money, and he was saying that well, he was pitching something absurd, and I got up and I said, "You're being naive," and the audience all laughed because this guy had money. And I was just a scientist, right? So, but later at the coffee break, somebody from the audience came up to me and said, "You must be from Caltech." And I said, "Yeah, you're right." So that's a related story. I mean, how did he know that I was from Caltech?
Okay, one more over here. It's close. Doug, behind you there.
So I had this discussion reminds me of two aspects of my own academic career. one is, as a teacher or professor, not speaking now about my own research, I'm a biologist or a geneticist, but as from the pedagogical point of view, and seeing Bob Leighton's name up there, your father, reminds me that he was my TA in the first year of this physics class.
Wow.
So in other words, what was remarkable about this class and is really mind-blowing for a contemporary academic is that Feynman taught these courses, but it was a departmental enterprise in that the entire faculty, including very prestigious people with their own careers, contributed mightily to, this is 4 straight semesters, 3 times a week lecture, and how many times a week did we have sections? Once or twice? I can't recall. Once a week of sections. And so the idea, I've said at lunch to my colleagues at Brandeis, can you imagine all of you contributing to a joint venture? So this was, I don't quite understand the dynamics, whether this was his own individual magnetism or a different era when people really did things collectively and were not quite as ego-driven as today, or exactly how this came about. So that's from the teacher's side, or the professor's side. And then from the student side, I've taught freshmen a couple of times a seminar on a course entitled something like Life Sciences for Poets, Lawyers, and Young People, what every educated person should know about what's happened in life sciences over the last 50 years. You know, how do we think the brain works, cancer, the kinds of things that I have just been around and watched explode since the 60s.
We got the expert coming
you
right
mean, you mean
behind
all
you.
this wasn't videotaped? I just did all that for nothing? I'm not going to repeat myself, so I'll just... No, I was being facetious. So there's a Brandeis trustee where I work whose name is Paula Absol, and she is the producer of Nova, and she got me VCR tapes in the 80s of the 3 Nova shows in which you feature very prominently. There's one from the 70s, if I'm not mistaken, and 2 from the 80s, and they're almost extinct, but I used them to the freshmen when I've taught them as the very beginning of the course, because of course part of this pedagogical exercise is how do scientists think, and of course something we learned in that first year course, which affected almost everyone in this room, and this touches on the issue of truthfulness, is the ability to say, well, we don't know what the explanation is, but it must be rational. We're not going to accept an irrational explanation. We should not be afraid of saying we don't understand that yet, but we will, or someone will. The next generation will, and that sense of rational foundation, I really learned in this room as a freshman.
Okay, thank you very much. I was very quickly, because it's really time to move on to our next speakers.
I wanted to follow up on this previous question. As an alumnus, I went to Frosh Camp several times. It was much more enjoyable as an alumnus than it was as a freshman. And I was fortunate on one trip that Richard Feynman was also on that trip. Even more fortunate that when they broke up into small groups of 10 or 12 students for discussion, I was in his group. Didn't have to say anything, but I got to listen. And he basically gave career advice. He said, how many here are going to be theoretical physicists? And about half the hands went up. And how many of you are going to solve the great problems of the universe? And of course, they all felt they would. And he says, you know, that's a very tough road, okay, to get to that point. Of course, they all knew he was a Nobel Prize winner at this point. He says, I don't care where you go with your physics education, whether it's a big company, small company, or whatever, people are going to come to you with questions. You are going to be the person that can solve the problems that they can't have that'll help them further what they're trying to do. He says, no matter what you do with your physics, it will be the thing that, basically gets you to that point where you're the person that is, in effect, a big fish in a small pond, if you want to look at it that way. And as he was giving this advice, which I've, having been alumnus and been in the workforce for a while, thought it was very, very astute advice. I looked around at these students and you could see, maybe the other guy's going to do that, but I'm going to be a great theoretical physicist. But it just showed you how much he cared about students, even at this point, trying to say, look, everybody can't win a Nobel Prize, but there are great things that you still can do, and this is the place to learn how to do it. So.
Okay, good story, Doug. Can you do this? How long are you going to take? Okay, we'll do 2 minutes, and that's it. Then
My name is Fred Scher. I was a professor of chemical engineering at Caltech while Richard Feynman was alive. And they mentioned freshman camp. I had the fortune of sailing out with John Matthews and his wife and John and Feynman himself. And I once asked him then, when did you really begin to feel at home in physics? And he said, well, I have never really totally felt at home in physics, but I learned an awful lot. And I felt a lot more confident after I taught freshman physics. He said the first year, he said, all these brilliant kids, they didn't know much physics, but they asked questions. And he said, I learned more about how to look at it from 6 different ways. And then we went to, I slept on one side of the deck and Feynman on the other side. John and his wife were in the bulkhead. And not wanting to bother them, he wanted to urinate. And he gets up and he goes over to the port side, and all of a sudden I hear this, wow! He says, chemiluminescence, it's bioluminescence. And he says, you got to try this.
Very good, very good. That was, take that, physicist, from a chemist. No, thank you. That's a great collection of stories there so far. I'm going to move on to our next speakers as though you don't need any more motivation, but I think having this perspective is incredibly useful. I'm going to introduce both of these together. Robbie will talk first. Robbie Vogt, he actually supported Bob Leighton, who is the one who followed Feynman giving the lectures for the class right after us. But obviously, just like it was an all hands on deck for our class, this is not a one man does the whole thing. So Robbie was new at Caltech then. He's the Stanton Avery Distinguished Service Professor and Professor of Physics Emeritus. But among that task, look at the other stuff he's done: division chair, provost, director of LIGO. And so Caltech has a great debt to owe him. And then following after him will be Kip Thorne, who's the Feynman Professor of Theoretical Physics Emeritus. One of our class members actually funded that chair, Mike Scott, who's not with us here. He's a Caltech BS, kind of when we were here. Went on to Princeton and came back and on the Caltech faculty since 1966. And then more recent, he's been very active in LIGO, and more recently he's the technical producer on Interstellar, that movie, written a book on that as well. And this is already out, but he will be announced on Saturday as one of our Caltech distinguished alumni this year. So nice work there. So Robbie, I'm going to turn the podium over to you, and Ralph, you can change this. I am done with the slides. Do we have a mic for?
Do I need a mic? Or can you hear me?
Yeah, we want it recorded.
Okay.
So,
okay. I'm not accustomed to that. In front of my mouth. But anyway, I hope you appreciate these new seats here.
Excuse me.
Most of the time. And also, I've always wanted to stand in front of that table because this would have allowed me to kick the students who fell asleep in my lecture in their shins. You might say, you mean you were such a boring lecturer?
Maybe I was, but there was also another thing. Caltech students had the tendency to do all-nighters, right? And then they finally came to the lecture to sleep. You know, they had to sleep sometime. And, but anyway, I want to mention something here. I mean, Bob Leighton has been mentioned repeatedly. Of course, I worked very closely with him. There was also Matt Sands, the other person, you know, and some of you might want to know that it is a strange coincidence, but his obituary is in this month's Physics Today. You might want to read it. Matt Sands is someone, so incidentally, with Matt gone, I'm the last of the Mohicans. That's not a particular distinction you want to have. But anyway, I will also talk a little bit about the legacy of the Feynman lectures, because you were the experimental subjects of Caltech, trying out how to teach a physics course to modern youth. And it must have been hard, because it was so much easier afterwards, and I will tell you why in a moment. But anyway, you might also want to read an article by Matt Sands. I don't remember the title, but anyway, I'll give it to you. You may want to read that. It's fascinating reading. It is in Physics Today, April 2005, and it's called Capturing the Wisdom of Feynman. And this is fascinating reading, because it tells you how it came about, how these Feynman lectures, how Feynman was recruited for it, you know, and was willing to do it at the end. You may enjoy reading that. There's also a little bit of faculty politics in this article. Matt was never very reluctant to pass judgment. And so anyway, I also read Feynman's preface for the Feynman lectures. And I must say, it is unfortunate that Feynman came to the kind of pessimistic conclusion which he wrote in his preface. I understand why it happened, because he had to get that information secondhand. How were you doing? And there were a number of professors who felt sorry for you and basically said it was too tough. But the point there is that anyway, I will tell you that it may have been very tough on you, but it was worth it, because the ones who followed you had it so much easier. And but somebody had to be tried out on somebody, you know. And also, let me say something about myself. You know, I was not with your class when you went through it. I came from Chicago in October 1962, and I learned right away how important teaching was at Caltech, and I had tried to avoid it in Chicago. But anyway, I came here, and when the division chairman offered me the position of an assistant professor, I said, oh, I can't be there before the middle of October. He said, no problem, we'll have a substitute. You can teach the day after you arrive. I did. Anyway, it was a very exhilarating and exciting time to be a faculty member at Caltech during that period. Somebody already mentioned, it was a community effort, which Dick could bring about, Feynman could bring about. Nobody else could have done that. Right? He did it. He unified this community, and he was always an example to us. As long as Feynman was there, you didn't allow yourself to do any crappy physics. Because you were embarrassed. He did not criticize you, but you know he would catch on, you know, and you were embarrassed. And so anyway, I came at that time, and Bob Leighton was the first faculty member who lectured after Feynman, the freshman course, and I was assigned to his course. I taught 2 recitation sections, ran the freshman lab, and worked very closely with Bob. And one thing which we did is we made a major effort to invent new problems, new exercises. You might say, yeah, to punish you? No, as somebody already said, the problems were how you finally learned the physics. I mean, this was the test. And so they were worth doing. Anyway, it was a great time. And I must say I consider myself privileged that I was there at that time. And then the second year came around, and Bob Leighton was the lecturer of the freshman course again. And in the second week of October, he called me in his office and says, Robbie, I have decided to go on a sabbatical, and you are it. The course is all yours. Now, Matt Sands had apparently already gotten wind of that. And Matt Sands I was in Bob's office, Matt Sands was stomping up and down the hallway, yelling, Leighton has lost his mind, he's crazy, he gives the Feynman course to a green, inexperienced assistant professor. And incidentally, Matt was a friend of mine. I mean, but nevertheless, he felt that was a little bit going too far. And so anyway, I had a particular connection to Matt because after World War II, when I was building equipment at the University of Heidelberg, modern electronics, there was a book called Elmore and Sands. And I learned from Sands how to do electronics with black market vacuum tubes and all that kind of stuff which we did at that time. But anyway, so on the 21st of October in 1963, I became what we call the Feynman lecturer. That means the lecturer used the Feynman text. And you might wonder, why do I remember October 21st, 1963? It's the birthday of my oldest daughter. And I had been up all night waiting for her finally to arrive. And I had gotten yellow fever and typhoid shots 2 days before because I had to go to India. I had a high fever. I hadn't slept all night. And I walked into the classroom here, and the poor students looked at me and said, oh, God, we are in trouble. You know. So anyway, it turned out better afterwards. Now, how did I do the Feynman lectures, work with the Feynman lectures? The first thing which I decided is, and you might be interested, because you see, in your case, your recitation instructors didn't know what next week would bring. There was a very tough job to help you with teaching, you know, for everybody. It was much, much easier the second year because we had the book. And I knew what would follow next. And so I assigned one chapter of Feynman for each lecture. And then I came in and I said, look, I'm not going to parrot Feynman because nobody can parrot Feynman. If you parroted him, you would diminish the impact of his works. I said, you have read the Bible. That's all what you will hear from me. Now I will teach you how to work with Feynman, how to work with what you read. And I did it by working out particular difficult sections in a slightly different way or in an amplifying way. I showed them exercises. I developed new demonstrations. So basically, they read Feynman, and I basically tried to teach them how to make use of it in the most effective way. And that seems to have worked reasonably well. In fact, when the TQFR came out, that means something only to those of us who are lecturers now, they were pretty generous. They said he did a good job, but so what? He had an excellent textbook. Now, there are other people who say the Feynman texts are not suitable as textbooks. They're wrong. If you do it right, you let them have Feynman, and then you help them to digest it and everything, and that can be made to work. And incidentally, when I was lecturing, even then, after the first year, there were always half a dozen professors sitting in the back row, not because they didn't trust me, but because they wanted to see how one followed Feynman. How can you possibly follow Feynman? And also, what I didn't realize when I worked with Bob Leighton, I was his understudy. He knew he would go on a sabbatical, but he didn't tell me, right? The pain was only mitigated by Alice Leighton, his wife. On the day where I had to start lecturing, she called up and she says, you know, you're in big trouble. But since you just had a kid, I gave you a subscription to a diaper service. This should help a little bit. And it did help. But that was the Caltech of those days. We were a big family. We were friends. Now, the professors, so for example, my understudy was Tommy Lowellson, full professor, very distinguished man. And there was a little assistant professor, and he had to be teaching recitation sections in my course for the year before he was ready to teach. And we kept that rule ever after. Nobody was allowed to teach Feynman unless he had been an apprentice for 1 year with a predecessor. And that was a good technique. Now, incidentally, even Feynman came once or twice to my lectures. He was sitting in front. And one lecture, I was in real trouble because he kept shaking his head. And the students were watching him. And I knew I was in big trouble. So after the lecture, when we talked together, I said, Dick, what the hell did I do wrong today that you were so dissatisfied? He said, what do you mean? I was dissatisfied. I did a fine job. I said, but you kept shaking your head. Oh, he said, I was thinking about something completely different. It had nothing to do with you. That the students didn't know that I was thinking of something different and I was in big trouble. But anyway, after a few years, I took on the sophomore course. And I must say, I loved Feynman's way of introducing quantum mechanics. Now, I had been taught quantum mechanics by no one less than Fermi. And that was good, but Feynman was better. Because he said once he only believed he understood physics if he could teach it to freshmen. And he tried to tell them the beauty of quantum mechanics, even if you were a biologist or a humanist or anything like that. And I think he did a superb job. I could appreciate that because I knew quantum mechanics. And so in my junior year, when I taught a junior course, I was never a junior. But when I taught a junior course in modern physics, I used Feynman quantum mechanics extensively, what he had taught them as sophomores, or what I had regurgitated to them when they were sophomores. And there were certain things you could do with Feynman quantum mechanics which were extremely elegant and much better. One of my favorite professors in Chicago had been Walter Lechte. He wrote once a paper, Nuovo Tremendo, which had 16, 20 pages, and I think he calculated the G-factor of the electron. And I told my students, juniors at Caltech, why don't you calculate a G-factor in less than 16 pages and with less much of mathematics, because you have the power. And I tell you, more than half the class came in with perfect solutions, and they were proud as peacocks because they had done something on 2 pages, which a famous professor had done on 16 pages with a lot of mathematics. Right? And so the Caltech students, if you gave them a chance, they were always there to get you out of trouble. And anyway, at this point, maybe I should just shut up.
Robbie, I just regret we didn't schedule another half an hour or an hour for our meeting here. Your stories are wonderful. Thank you so much for that. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to pass this over to Kip, and I might ask Tom Seufer, if we go over 10 minutes, is that okay? Or, Tom's in charge here, and he's...
The next class doesn't come in until 4.
Doesn't come in until 4. Well, but we're starting to impinge on drinking time, so I'm... Sorry for loading you with that, Kip, but
Thanks, Tim.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Robbie. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I'm not quite as loud as Robbie is. So before I talk about Feynman, I just wanted to call your attention to the wonderful things that Michael Gottlieb and Ralph Leighton have done in terms of the Feynman legacy, in terms of making sure that huge numbers of errata that were in the original version of the Feynman Lectures on Physics were repaired in later editions, creating a published version now of the solution of problem sets and solutions that were associated with the course in the early years, problem sets that were largely devised by Robbie and by Ralph Leighton's father, Bob. Creating along with Rudi Pfeiffer in Germany, Michael has created an electronic edition of the Feynman Lectures on Physics. And so the legacy of Feynman is now being spread throughout the world far more than you would have ever expected 50 years later. It's really remarkable what they've achieved. I'd like to talk for just a few minutes about two of the things that I learned were secrets of Feynman's great success in physics as a researcher. And I'll tell these to you in terms of stories. The first story begins with Martin Schmidt's discovery of quasars here at Caltech in 1963. This was while you were taking sophomore physics course from Feynman in your second term. Martin discovered quasars, and huge numbers of people around the world start to struggle, try to understand what they were. Fred Hoyle was visiting Caltech, and he and Willie Fowler devised a theory of quasars based on supermassive stars, stars that weighed, say, 1 million times what the sun weighs. And they gave a seminar on this. And in the seminar here at Caltech, this would have been, by then have been your third term as sophomores. In the seminar, while they were talking about these marvelous supermassive stars, Feynman stood up and objected. He said, you know, because of general relativity, those stars are going to be unstable. They'll collapse. And everybody's jaws dropped. And shortly thereafter, Subramanian Chandrasekhar at the University of Chicago published a paper on the same thing, explaining about this relativistic instability that nobody had ever known about before. But it became legendary, a legendary example of Richard Feynman's insights, that he just knew this, that these stars were going to be unstable, they would implode, and so this theory of Hoyle and Fowler couldn't be right in the way they proposed it. So when I came back on the faculty a few years later, I asked Dick about it. I said, how did you know? And he said, well, I'll show you. And so he came back the next day and brought me a sheaf of 40 pages of calculations he had done. He had been curious because our common mentor, John Wheeler at Princeton, had been urging everybody to study the collapse of objects to form what we now call black holes. This was a great crisis in physics, a great opportunity to really learn about the nature of the interface between quantum theory and general relativity. And so Dick, by himself, just curious about this, had done 40 pages of calculations, trying to understand the onset of gravitational collapse of stars. He'd come to understand it, he was happy with it, and he put these 40 pages of calculations, hand calculations away. They included solving with a slide rule the equation for the onset of the collapse numerically, because he didn't have digital computers in those days. And so I asked Feynman, how did you know? Well, this was the answer. He had, because of his own intellectual curiosity, he had pursued this question, he had satisfied himself with it, and he had never told anybody about it. He'd just done this at home by himself, just out of intellectual curiosity. And then it happened that this theory of quasars was proposed some months later, or maybe something like a year later, I'm not sure. And so he knew from the sweat of his own brow that these things were going to be unstable. Of course, he didn't tell his colleagues at the time that he knew. It was Feynman, the oracle, announcing things. So the secret to many, I know, of his miraculous, oracular remarks was hard work of his own, driven by intellectual curiosity, working at home by himself, just trying to understand the universe around us. So my second story, I had three stories. I'm cutting back to two. I have to just see which one it is. Okay. When I came back on the faculty, I found that Richard Feynman was a wonderful person to go to help you solve problems. Now this goes back to Doug's remark about what Feynman said you might do after you get your degrees. Go and be the guru that helps other people solve problems. Well, for me, he was my guru, helped me solve problems. If I thought I had an idea, a brilliant idea, I would go to Dick and I would say, can you tear this idea apart? Let's talk about it, let's brainstorm. And so we would brainstorm. And I remember this happening 3 or 4 times during my career. I would have a great idea about once every 5 or 10 years. So 3 or 4 times during my career was about par for the course. Anyway, so I would go to him. We would talk for a few hours. He would object to this, that, or the other thing. I would say, I'm going to go home and I'm going to think about it, and I'll come back tomorrow and let's talk some more. He said, sure. So I'd go back the next day. Remarkably, he had almost zero memory of what we had discussed the preceding day. But that didn't matter because he could recreate it all very, very quickly. Feynman had the power of figuring things out, and so he didn't have to remember things. Or maybe it was that he wasn't able to remember things, so he developed the power of finding things out. I'm not sure which it is. So it may have been that part of the secret of his success was his lousy memory, or perhaps his willingness to forget, because developing that ability to figure things out from first principles, time and time again, whenever you face something, that was one of the huge powers that he had, more than anybody else that I have ever encountered.
Kip and Robbie, thank you guys so much. That was really good. We're close to the end of our time here. We could take a few more minutes if I have any strong stories, or if you'd rather, if the group would rather start on the wine and the other stuff, we can do that. Do you have any other special comments? No, I don't see any. One here.
Question for Robbie Volk. Why did they have to reteach Physics 2C?
Why did they have to reteach Physics 2C after Feynman?
He redid it.
He redid Physics 2C. So Feynman taught Physics 2C their sophomore year, but then he retaught it their junior year for the next class.
Yeah, I don't know the reason for that.
I don't know the reason either, but I failed it the first time, so I had to take it again myself. Sorry, just to be totally, Gary, here.
Just a word on Physics 2C. I got the only blue slip of my whole career here halfway through it. And I said, I'm going to flunk this thing. That's not good. So I took a different tact. I went back and I said, I'm not going to take any notes. I'm just going to do a mind meld with Dick. And somehow you'd go in this trance and his thoughts would just flow into my head. It was a miracle. And I got an A+ in 2C.
Well, damn it, we're in the same house. Why didn't you tell me that? Roger? Okay, he's got a quick one.
Am I the only one who remembers the most vivid thing about this room and physics and the whole rest of being a freshman here, which was the dominant emotion of fear? When I walked, we all were great at high school. A third of us were valedictorians. We had these fabulous SATs. We walk in and we hear Dick Feynman, and I was bloody scared. And I was scared by all the other guys too, but it was especially true in here. And And the thing I remember most distinctly, and I don't know when it was, but it was pretty early on, it was when this feedback was coming that people were nervous and didn't get it. He stood up there and in almost an avuncular way, he said, I know this is tough. Remember, you're a selected special group. You've done terrific things so far in your life. Keep working. When you get out of here, it's all going to be fine. And you know what? He was right.
It was. Very good comment. Thank you, Roger. I think I'm going to cap off the 65 comments there. Michelle Feynman in the room said that she would be happy to make some remarks, and so I'd like to give her the microphone now. Where's? Oh, okay. Yeah. Somebody told me. Okay.
Well, then let me just say something about this.
Okay.
So, I would suggest you keep an eye out in a few months for a new book that Michelle has put together. Quotations from Richard Feynman. I'm not sure. What's the precise title of the book?
The Quotable Feynman.
So the Quotable Feynman.
Okay, good.
I was just sent an electronic copy of it in order to write a blurb about it. I browsed it very, very quickly. It is fabulous. If you want to see Feynman's thoughts on anything and everything captured together succinctly, it's a fabulous book, and I thank you, Michelle, for putting that together.
Okay. I apologize. That was a rumor that I guess was not true. Patsy, could you take a mic up to Tom Seufer? I'm going to give him the final thing here to tell us about. I told them I did not know what the colloquium subject was because I had my own stress about running this meeting.
Okay, well, let me.
By the way, let me just say this is Tom Seufer, chairman of the Physics, Math, and Astronomy division, and
class of '68.
Class of '68.
So when I came onto the campus for the first time when those of you who were in the class of '65 were seniors. You'd already survived the physics, the Feynman physics, and Robbie was the lecturer in my class, and I would sit back up there and stay awake. So let me add my welcome to you. It's a real pleasure to have you here and participate. I've really enjoyed this. With that, I will just tell you what the talk is. For those of you who are really hardcore, the talk today is by Joe Leighton, who is a theoretical physicist, and he's the deputy director of Fermi National Accelerator Lab. And he will be talking about neutrinos are everywhere. So for those of you who are interested, you're certainly welcome to come back up here. And right now we are, the division is very happy to host a reception for you downstairs, room 114. Go down the stairs and turn left. And hopefully the wine and other things will be there.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to leave the picture here. I think those of you that as you cycle by, if you could get your name recorded on there, and then we'll, Ralph, somebody else can then bring it back downstairs to those who missed it. So don't panic, it won't be your only chance, but as you're rotating out, go ahead and take this. And again, thank you for a wonderful session.